Alrighty, people, welcome back to the next session here on Daniel's prophecies about the 70 weeks. Okay, I'm just finishing up here, making some comments on my friends' Facebook. Okay, in this last video, and yes, I'm right after the first one. But this video again will be uploaded for Thursday. Okay, so if y'all watching this on Thursday, well, you know what I mean. I don't want to make it confusing for you guys. Okay. In continuance, again, remember, people, how prophecy works. A lot of these things, a lot of deceived preachers out there have said, well, those are not for us. Those things have already been, they've already happened. They already came to pass only for the people, only for the Jews of Israel. They're not for us. But there's people out there who are hungry for it. They want to understand these things, right? There's a lot of things in our Bibles that people just are led to believe, oh, you'll be okay. Just read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and read the nice scriptures, and that's it. But there's also a lot of other prophecies, a lot of scriptures, speaking of prophecy, that are important and for our understanding today. Okay, so recently we were covering about the 62 weeks and the 70 years and so on. Okay, so I will continue here out of this book, very great book. Okay, all right. This one's going to cover a bit more of history research. Okay, speaking of these things, this section is called "The Last 7 Years of Man's Governments Will End in Destruction." We read of this prophecy that by peace will destroy many in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, and speaking of the 7-year covenant, on how that particular one was speaking of the late Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, the Israelis and the Arabs, and trying to get the one policy going about world peace. But those things have never been fully fulfilled because man, through his own ways, could never and will never establish peace, true peace. Okay. All right. Since the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were devastated by the atomic bomb, scientists have learned much about the effects of nuclear power. The searing heat, the blast, and the radiation effects have been known and studied since these disasters occurred. But the two recent studies suggest yet another catastrophic consequence of an all-out nuclear exchange, one that had largely been overlooked, which is a nuclear winter. Okay, now we have so much technology and we become more savage that we can actually destroy ourselves off this planet. Okay. And just because, like America is said to have the most powerful military, but I don't know that. For all we know, China and Japan and all these other countries and Russia and Ukraine might have bigger guns per se and bigger bombs. I don't know, but these are things, like it says, that have been overlooked until now, that they can actually darken the sun and so on. Okay. Incredibly, several of Yahweh's prophets foretold of this despicable weapon and its deadly effects upon both mankind and the planet Earth thousands of years ago. This evil invention of death and destruction and the carnage that will result from man's use of it is graphically detailed in the prophetic writings. The prophet Joel is one of several of Yahweh's prophets who forewarned of this time of nuclear warfare in Joel chapter 2, 30 and 31. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. Pillars of smoke, right? The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahweh comes. Please notice he states that the sun will be darkened. Okay? Total blackout. At a meeting in Washington, D.C., late in October of 1983, scientists warned that soot, smoke, and dust from the explosions of less than half of the superpowers' nuclear arsenals could blanket the Earth, block out the sun, and cause a prolonged, bitterly cold nuclear winter. This climactic upheaval, these scientists warned, could threaten the survival of the total human race. Planetary scientist Carl Sagan reported that he and several colleagues had run mathematical simulations showing that the pall from burning cities, forests, and fuel stocks would create a dense cloud that could screen much of the northern hemisphere from more than 90% of the sun's light for as long as a month. Within 2 weeks of detonation, the surface of the Earth could cool to 13 degrees Fahrenheit and remain that cold for months. After several weeks, the cloud could reach the southern hemisphere as well. Full daylight and normal temperatures would not return for as long as a year. Using the physicist's predictions, a team of biologists headed by Stanford University's Paul Ehrlich gauged the ecological consequences of several levels of nuclear war. After a major conflict involving more than three-quarters of the available arsenal, the cold would devastate crops and other plant life, particularly if war occurred during the spring or summer. Terrible. Fresh water would freeze, hungry and thirsty animals would die. At the same time, the dark would limit photosynthesis, the process by which plants produce the chemical compounds necessary for life. In the oceans outside of Arctic regions, the lack of sunlight would be felt immediately. There, the food chain depends on microscopic plants that are extremely sensitive to changes in the amount of light they receive. Kukui. On the landmasses in the tropics, where most plants lack a reserve of stored energy, a substantial decrease in the amount of sunshine would quickly extinguish many species. Elric said, over the decades that follow, we cannot exclude the possibility of the extinction of the human species. 4 high-ranking Soviet scientists agreed late in 1983 with the conclusion of the United States scientists of the effects of a nuclear war. They agreed nuclear war would be far more calamitous and global than most analysts have until now believed. For the first time, well-respected scientists from the United States and the Soviet Union have concluded that even a small-scale nuclear war could mean the end of life on this planet. As of this date, 1983, no different conclusion has ever been presented, and this book was printed or published in 1986. The consensus is that nuclear war will be the end of life as we know it. Dr. Henry Kissinger, a former presidential cabinet member, in an Associated Press interview said, "I don't know how long we can postpone a nuclear war, but we all know one thing. When we have a nuclear war, it will be the last war ever fought." World War III. Again, the scientific studies conducted show what nuclear war would bring. As stated previously, soot, smoke, and dust from the explosions of less than half of the superpowers, nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, nuclear arsenals could blanket the earth and black out the sun. This isn't very pretty at all, huh, people? Nothing to laugh about. It's crazy. All right. The following article, an essay from Discover magazine of February 1984, details directly what the consequences of the nuclear war. Dr. Thomas was one of the 4 American scientists who, at the invitation of Senators Edward Kennedy and Mark Hatfield, met in Washington in December for a 3-hour open discussion with 4 Soviet counterparts. The subject of their discussion, the nuclear winter, and this is from Discover January. All right. This is from the article. 2 scientific reports have recently been published dealing with the probable effects of nuclear war upon the Earth's climate and the life of the planet. The first discovery is already widely known within the scientific community of climatologists, geophysicists, physicists, and biologists here and abroad, and has been confirmed in detail by scientists in the Soviet Union. Computer models demonstrate that a nuclear war involving the exchange of less than 1/3 of the total American and Soviet arsenal will change the climate of the entire northern hemisphere, shifting it abruptly from its present seasonal state to a long sunless frozen night. This will be followed after some months by a settling of nuclear soot and dust, then by a new malignant kind of sunlight with all of its ultraviolet band, capable of blinding most terrestrial animals, no longer shielded from the Earth by the ozonosphere. In the same research, new calculations of the extent and intensity of radioactive fallout predict the exposure of large land areas to much more intense levels of radiation than expected. The report is referred to as TTAPS, an acronym derived from the investigators' names Turco, Toon, Ackerman, Pollack, and Sagan. The second piece of work by Paul Ehrlich and 19 other distinguished biologists demonstrates that the predictions of TTAPs mean nothing less than the extinction of much of the Earth's biosphere, very possibly involving the southern hemisphere as well as the northern. Taken together, the two papers change everything in the world about the prospect of thermonuclear warfare. They have already received a careful and critical review by scientists representing the disciplines concerned here and abroad, and there already appears to be an unprecedented degree of concurrence with the technical details as well as the conclusions drawn. In the view of some referees, the TTAPS report may even be understanding that climatological damage implied by its data. The 20 biologist papers summarized by Professor Ehrlich represents the consensus arrived at by 40 biological scientists at a meeting in Woods Hole, Massachusetts last spring. It is a new world demanding a new kind of diplomacy and a new logic. Up to now, the international community of statesmen, diplomats, and military analysts has tended to regard the prospect of nuclear war as a problem only for the adversaries in possession of the weapons. Arms control and the endless negotiations aimed at the reduction of nuclear explosives have been viewed as the responsibility, even the prerogative, of those few nations in actual confrontation. Now, all that has changed. There is no nation on earth free of the jeopardy of destruction if any two countries or groups of countries embark upon a nuclear exchange. If the Soviet Union and the United States and their respective allies in the Warsaw Pact and NATO began to launch their missiles beyond a still undetermined and ambiguous minimum, neutral states like Sweden and Switzerland are in for the same long-term effects, the same slow death as the actual participants. Imagine that, just blowing yourself up, huh? Australia and New Zealand, Brazil, and South Africa could have as much to worry about as West Germany if a full-scale exchange were to take place far to the north. Up to now, we have all tended to regard any conflict with nuclear arms as an effort by paired adversaries to settle such issues as territorial dominance or ideological dispute. Now, with the new findings before us, it is clear that any territory gained will be at the end a barren wasteland, and any ideology will vanish in the death of civilization and the permanent loss of mankind's memory of culture. The risk of this kind of war have conventionally been calculated by the numbers of dead human beings on either side at the end of the battle, armies and non-combatants together. The terms acceptable and unacceptable, signifying so and so many million human casualties, have been used for making cool judgments about the need for new and more accurate weapon systems. From now on, things are different. Leave aside the already taken for granted estimate that an all-out exchange of, say, 5,000 megatons, something like 1 billion people would be killed outright by blast, heat, and radiation. Set aside as well the likely fact that more than another billion will die later on from the delayed effects of the climate and radioactive fallout. It's crazy, huh? Crazy. I remember I brought this out to you a couple of videos back that I was talking to a guy who said, well, they've already tried it and people can't survive. Yeah, maybe for a few days, but as powerful as this thing is said to be, eventually, where are you going to get fresh air from? Not in the caves that they're digging. There are underground caves where they are storing seeds, plants, all this kind of stuff. They're keeping them dormant, but a lot of that stuff can very easily go to waste because no pressure or whatever. I don't know how a lot of that stuff works, but can't prove our father wrong. Okay. These articles, these statements have been brought forth by well-known scientists. Like even this guy said that it will be the last war ever fought. Because I'm sure he knew how devastating this last one could be. or will be, right? The great prophet Jeremiah tells us that Yahweh has a controversy against the nations. Notice now in Jeremiah's chapters 25, 31 through 33. A noise will come to the ends of the earth, for Yahweh has a controversy, a legal indictment against the nations. He will plead or enter into judgment with all flesh. The wicked will be given to the sword, says Yahweh. I just need to take this thing off anyways. This is what Yahweh of hosts says. Behold, disaster will go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind will be raised up from the coast of the earth. And at that day the slain of Yahweh will be from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. They will not be lamented nor gathered, neither buried. They will be refuse on the ground. Notice, Yahweh's prophet said this, from the one end to the earth to the other. Okay. So obviously, again, these are very critical and important prophecies to understand and realize that these things are coming. They will be prophesied to the letter. They will be fulfilled to the letter. In verse 32, Jeremiah shows that disaster will go from nation to nation. Yes, we will see disasters coming from one nation and going to another nation. Remember, the missiles which carry these nuclear warheads are designed to travel from nation to nation. In verse 31 and 32, we read that a noise will be heard from one end of the earth, from one end of the earth to another, and that a great whirlwind will be raised up from the coast of the earth. These nuclear explosions will involve all nations. No area on earth will escape either the great noise or the vast destruction. In verse 33, we learn that this catastrophe will befall the whole earth. On that day, destruction and waste of human life will occur from one end of the earth to the other. Scripture tells us there will be so many dead, there will be none to gather and bury them. These bodies will literally rot like garbage on the ground. The prophet Jeremiah also tells us that the city of Jerusalem will not escape the nuclear holocaust. Notice now in Jeremiah 25:29. For behold, I begin to bring disaster on the city which is called with my name, so shall you be utterly unpunished. You will not be unpunished, for I will call for a sword on all inhabitants of the earth, says Yahweh of hosts. Okay. Jeremiah foretells that Yahweh's name is not called on in the city of Jerusalem at the time of this occurrence. I would make mention of the names on how they contain Yahweh's name as a pre or a suffix. Judah or Yada has Yahweh's name in it. Judah does not have God's name in it. See the difference? The prophet Ezekiel was inspired to write that there will come a time in the future, after the world comes into complete subjection to Yahweh, that the city of Jerusalem will be renamed. Notice in Ezekiel 48:35, the name of the city from that day will be Yahweh Shammah, or Yahweh is there. We find in Jeremiah 25:29 that it is Yahweh who will call for a sword on all the inhabitants of the earth, not just part of it. Yahweh's prophet Hosea or Hosea spoke of this time of trouble, and he also told us why this disaster is coming upon all the earth. Notice now in Hosea 4:1-6. Hear the word of Yahweh, you children of Israel, for Yahweh has a controversy, a legal dispute with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of Yahweh in the land. There isn't much knowledge of Yahweh in the land as it is, so this prophecy stands true. Everybody, or the majority rather, rejects Yahweh, his name, his laws, commandments, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. By pronouncing curses, lying, killing, stealing, and committing adultery, they break out with bloodshed following bloodshed. We see this today. Therefore, the land will mourn, and everyone who dwells in it will languish. With the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, yes, even the fish of the sea will be taken away. Now let no man contend or argue with, nor rebuke another, for my contention is with the priests. Ooh. Therefore you will fall in the day, and the prophet will also fall with you in the night, and I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you. That you will be no priest to me because you have forgotten the law of Yahweh. I will also forget your children. Remember when Yahweh gave Moshe the law, he says, for you and your children and your children's children? Okay. But this had to do with obedience. And so there is no obedience here spoken of by the prophet Hosea, then that is why the people are being destroyed. Okay. Excuse me. In verse 1, we see that Yahweh has a controversy with all the inhabitants of the land because they have forgotten Yahweh and his name and his way. In verse 2, we see that it is the breaking of Yahweh's 613 laws that causes the curse of nuclear war to come upon all the world. Remember that it started on a minority set with Cain killing Abel. Now it's nation against nation, and now it's on a global scale. It's gone viral, right? Per se, like they say on the social platforms. Even Metallica's song, Moth into the Flame, says destruction going viral, something like that. Remember, the prophet Jeremiah also warned of this in Jeremiah 25, 32, and 33. We read that earlier. Yeah. He says, I'll read it again. This is what Yahweh of hosts says, behold, disaster will go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind will be raised upon from the coasts of the earth. And at that day the slain of Yahweh will be from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. They will not be lamented nor gathered, neither buried. They will be refuse on the ground. Not a pretty sight. In verse 3, we see that everyone who lives in Israel will languish along with all wildlife, and the fish of the sea will be destroyed. Please remember that one of the deadly consequences of nuclear winter discussed previously is the fact that the lack of sunlight will directly affect the food chain in the oceans, and as a result, kill all species of marine life. What else but nuclear war could destroy all life from one end of the earth to the other, while at the same time destroying all marine life? Sunlight. I guess this is, oh, I know this is why, like the Aztecs and the Mayans and all other God worshippers who have ever worshipped the sun, they worship the sun because that is what gives life to plants, fish, and everything else. But Yahweh is the giver of life, not the sun. Okay. So I got plenty of time. In verse 6, Yahweh then tells why these horrors will occur. The people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. They have rejected Yahweh and accepted God or Satan. Therefore, this world will be destroyed. Compare the previously mentioned scriptures in Hosea 4, 1 through 6 with Deuteronomy 28, 15 and 22 through 24. Deuteronomy 28, chapter 28, verses 15 and verses 22 through 24. However, if you do not obey Yahweh your Father and do not carefully follow all his laws and his statutes, which I command you this day, then all these curses will come upon you and accompany you. Yahweh will strike you with consumption, with a fever, with an inflammation, with scorching heat, with the sword, with blasting, and with mildew. They will stay with you until you perish. And the heaven that is over your heads shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. Yahweh shall make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon you until you are destroyed. So, if you're one of those who thinks you're already saved and saying, well, these things are not going to happen to me because I'm already saved. No. Nobody is excluded. All sinners will be destroyed. That's what it's saying. Those who have refused Yahweh's knowledge through the scriptures, through the law and the prophets, and then those who did receive them and then did them at the end as well, like it says in John 14 or 17, that says, if you do not keep his laws, then you will not be judged. Okay, so, pretty much plain and simple. In verse 22, notice the words scorching heat. This is a word 2746 from 2787 in Strong's Hebrew Dictionary of Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, and means melting by extreme burning. Kind of like what we saw, right, in Indiana Jones. I put it in one of my last videos, how his face was melting. Something like that. And then we also saw the same, more or less, same situation in the Terminator Part 2, where Sarah Connor's on the fence and the nuclear bomb goes off and she just burns and whatever. That's just a depiction of what can occur. The survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings testified that it was like fire that came down from heaven and devoured the cities and people in them. These survivors were quoted as saying, "A person would be standing against a building and his flesh and clothes would just be consumed away. Others had their eyes consumed away in their sockets, and their flesh just disappeared off their bones, and their bones dropped to the ground." The prophet Zechariah also foretold of this devastation which nuclear war would cause. The prophet Zechariah also foretold of the devastation which nuclear war would cause. Notice in Zechariah 14:12. "And this will be the plague with which Yahweh will strike all the peoples who have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes will consume away in their sockets, and their tongues will consume away in their mouths." This is literal. This is not a spiritual speech, okay? In the above verse, Zechariah describes perfectly what occurs to flesh after the detonation of nuclear weapons. When we compare this prophecy with the evidence noted above, it becomes obvious that studying and learning the prophetic writings is the only way man has to save himself from destruction. Let us look again at the following scriptures that says, Deuteronomy 28, verses 22 through 24. "Yahweh will strike you with consumption, with a fever, with an inflammation, with scorching heat, with the sword, and with blasting, and with mildew. They will stay with you until you perish. And the heaven that is over your heads shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. Yahweh shall make the rain of your land powder and dust from heaven, and shall come down upon you until you are destroyed." Isn't that crazy? But I just had this pop into my head. There might have been people even in Zechariah's time when he spoke of these things, even Moses, that were probably looking around like, well, it didn't happen. Like people are saying today when a prophet speaks of these things today. They probably just wait around like, well, he's a false prophet. Just saying, okay? The word translated sword in verse 22, it means to desolate, destroy, kill, make waste, dry up, slay, or to perish through war. Notice from word number 2719, the word sword is kereb, which means a cutting instrument from its destructive effect. Kareb or karab in Hebrew, desolate, destroy, or kill. The word translated blasting in Deuteronomy 28:22 is word number 7711 from 7710 in Strong's Hebrew Dictionary and means to scorch from blasting. And it has the words scorch and blast here defined. The word blast in this context means war and the effects of it. This is an explosive blast, an indication of a nuclear explosion by means of war. In Deuteronomy 28:24, we see that the rain of the land will be powder and dust. The word powder is word number 80 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, and the word dust from this same source is word number 6083 and word 6080 from Strong's Hebrew Concordance. And it says here, powder, dust, particles, dust as powdered or gray, hence clay or earth. Mud, ashes, dust, earth, ground, mortar, powder, rubbish. And then word number 6080, afar, meaning either to be gray or rather to be pulverized, used only as a form to be dust or cast into dust. It's crazy. This powder and dust is also a result of nuclear warfare. When these nuclear weapons are detonated, they will pulverize the soil, turn it into volatile particles, gray in color, that will rise above the earth. This powder and dust is known as nuclear fallout, which will rain down upon the earth just as Yahweh prophesied through his prophets, right? These prophecies can only be speaking of the very last generation of the 6,000 years allotted to mankind, in which Yahweh allows mankind the opportunity to live according to his own carnal nature and suffer the usually tragic consequences of his errant decisions. Yahweh has sent prophet after prophet to warn this world of the consequences of man's own form of government and of the consequences of breaking his laws, statutes, and judgments. Yahweh's prophets have continually cried out to the world to avoid following the ways of man, which is in vain. Okay. I made a statement a few videos back, a couple of times saying that people might be thinking, why does God let these things happen? We're letting these things happen. Our own sinful carnal nature ways, or natural ways, are causing this destruction. We are bringing upon these curses upon ourselves. Okay. Can't blame anybody else but ourselves. But at the same time, like he says, that he had a contention with the priests. Okay. Your priest should be the one teaching you these things. Because like it says, like he just stated, Yahweh has sent all his prophets to warn us of these things. We don't need, per se, God called self-proclaimed prophets that tell us, oh, no, those things are not for us today. They're for the Jews only. Okay. Let's see. Yahweh, through his faithful prophets, is warning the world that Satan is determined to bring mankind and planet Earth to total destruction by keeping mankind from Yahweh's name and Yahweh's perfect way and his laws of righteousness. A true way of peace, a true love, and true righteousness. It is time to wake up to the fact that most of Yahweh's prophecies have already come to pass, and we can expect those that remain to come to pass also. Remember what I read to y'all in the book of Isaiah. When Yahweh says in Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, those things which are not yet done, saying, my counsel will stand and I will fulfill all my plan. Again, this is why Mr. Hawkins says, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter what I say or your preachers, it's what Yahweh says, his plan will be fulfilled to the dot. Okay. So, me, as your friend, I think it's time for all of us to start reading those prophecies and come to the understanding that those things are real and that they're for everybody. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, everybody. Not just the Jews. The nature of mankind has not changed in the 6,000 years they have ruled planet Earth, while led by Satan and rebelling against the righteous laws of Yahweh. Yahweh tells us through his prophet Moshe that man's carnal nature is a mixture of righteousness and evil, as has been the case since Eve allowed Lucifer to deceive her. Let me just make a real quick point, kind of on and off the subject. Been having discussions with women and saying that, they make claims something like, well, Oli, you know how they say that behind every good man is behind every successful man is a woman who was, and I'm like, okay, that's what you believe in. I mean, okay. I tell them, I said, but I just knock them off their high horse. And I tell them, well, in the case of Adam and Eve, it doesn't it doesn't hold any water. Okay. And they just look at me, or they text me back like, they give me the little angry emoji. I mean, it's the truth. It's the truth. Okay. I don't want to live my life according to people's opinions. Okay. I make my life according to what I'm studying. I don't eat defiled meats. I try not to eat them when I do. And I have on purpose and or ignorantly, but ignorance is not going to save me. I know these things. I make myself aware of these things because that is what the word says. But I'm not going to sit here like I was telling you about my dad telling me, well, you shouldn't put religion in front of Thanksgiving. I'm going to. He's coming this weekend, and I'm not going to go sit with him and celebrate Christmas because that is my belief. And I was telling my mom this morning when I went to go drop her off, taking the car to the mechanic, I said, Mom, I'm going to do whatever I want. That I am no longer under obligation to listen to that man anymore. Okay. So this is how we're being tested, people, and how we prove ourselves. Either we We cannot have two masters, right? We cannot serve two masters. We either serve one and hate the other. Okay. And don't let our family tell us, well, come on, kid, at least come over here and just hang out with us. I'll go tomorrow. I'll go the next day, I mean. But anyways. Okay. Lucifer deceived Eve by enticing her to partake of her way, a mixture of righteousness and evil. In verse 6, we see that Lucifer made the rejection of Yahweh's laws look and sound desirable. Just like today, we have all these false teachings, right? Well, you can keep the laws, but you don't have to. Jesus did it all for you because he loves you. They paint a very nice picture, but it's all false. Always remember how the serpent deceived Eve and then caused man to fall, her husband. Okay, so that stuff y'all might hear, and if you're a lady, that behind a successful man, there was a good. No, I don't believe in that. Because our Messiah was a man who was a righteous man without having a woman behind him. Okay. In the very same way, since then, this has been the way of worldly religions, mixing righteousness and evil, picking and choosing their own doctrine as they see fit, or they jump from church to church because they got tired of hearing the same crap. So they find one that eventually will tell them things that they want to hear. Not necessarily scriptural truths, but what sounds soothing to their ears, right? To their itching ears, like Timothy said. They practice some of Yahweh's laws, but they add to them the deceptions of Lucifer and the vain pagan traditions of men. This is not the way of Yahweh. His way is purely and just righteous. And purely righteous. Yahweh warns us continually to keep from sin, the breaking of his laws, and to live according to every word that proceeds from his mouth, as we read in Deuteronomy 8:3, and Yeshua quoted this in Matthew 4:4. And remember again what Deuteronomy 4:2 and 12:32 says, do not add to or take away from it. And then in Revelation 22:18-19 again, it says, do not add to or take away from it. Okay. In every instance where man allows Satan to influence him in thought and deed, great harm and usually tragedy results. This continual misguidance by Satan has and will continue to lead mankind into the way of death, which is exactly Satan's motive. Okay. So let me remind you again. Let me see. Okay, I think what I'm going to do. I still got plenty of time. Okay. But let me just remind you the three questions that were asked. They asked the Messiah, when will be, what will be the sign, when will the end come, and what will be, all this stuff. First thing he said is, do not let any man deceive you. Okay. Many false prophets would arise and deceive the many, or the majority. So the majority of this world is already deceived into thinking that Jesus did it all for you, and all you got to do now is believe, and you can, but you don't have to kind of attitude. But always remember the first deception that the serpent gave Eve. You're not going to die if you break the laws of our Father. Remember that. Okay. It's just like being at home. Dad and mom are going to punish you. I mean, they'll just, they'll probably just tell you to behave. Something like that, right? But the scriptures and the teachings are real as opposed to being taught at home, right? But this is the great deception that it's gone viral, per se, through today's churches or, everywhere. That we're not going to die, that we have an immortal soul, that after we die, our soul just keeps on living. That's not true. Ezekiel 18:4 says that the soul that sins, it will die. Okay. Twitter. Buenos dias, buenos dias, buenos dias. All right. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Okay. This is man's government will bring nuclear destruction. This is just more detailed info on what I've been covering here out of this booklet. Okay. All right. Yahweh reveals through his prophets and world leaders agree that unless he literally intervenes into man's disastrous affairs, mankind will be utterly destroyed. The prophet Daniel was inspired to foretell of the last week, the last 7 years of man's rule under the influence of Satan upon the earth. We read in Daniel 9:26 that the people of the prince that will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Obviously, this is not the people of Yeshua, right? Because they're not coming to destroy unless these beastly governments are destroyed and given to Yahweh's people. The word translated prince in this verse is word number 5057 in Strong's Hebrew and means a commander as occupying the front, a civil, military, or religious leader. And religious leader here is underlined. We also see in Daniel 9:26 that the city and the temple is destroyed. The only reason for the destruction of the temple, Yahweh's house, and the city of Jerusalem was to completely destroy all that represented the way of Yahweh and his 613 laws of righteousness. Let us remember that Titus in 70 of this common era was so determined to accomplish this that he slaughtered 1 million people and unearthed every foundation stone of the temple. Notice in Jeremiah 26:18, this is what Yahweh of hosts says: Zion will be plowed like a field, Jerusalem will become heaps of ruins, and the mountain of the house of Yahweh like the bare hills of the forest. Notice again in Micah 3:12, therefore because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field, Jerusalem will become heaps of rubble, and the mountain of the house of Yahweh like the high places of a forest. Again, now we have two witnesses confirming this prophecy. The only reason the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed was to wipe out those who stood for Yahweh's 613 laws of Yahweh. The tallit worn by the Hebrew priests when this tallit is designed properly shows the true name of the Creator, Yahweh, and the number 613, the number of Yahweh's perfect laws. There's so many, little strings hanging down, and how many, the twists, all that is by done by ordinance as well. That's why you see the members of the house of Yahweh that have their kippas or the yarmulke, whatever it's called, and they have their tallits and they have the little strings hanging down. All that is done by ordinance or measurement as well. Remember, this religious leader was prophesied to speak against the name of Yahweh and the laws of Yahweh. Daniel 7:25, right? Will speak great words against Yahweh and will think to change times and laws and feast days. Many have noticed in recent months the attacks against any religion which dares use the name of Yahweh or which advertises the keeping of Yahweh's laws, the weekly Sabbath, Saturday, or the feast days commanded to be kept forever. These laws will be discussed more fully in a later chapter. There is so much persecution against those who keep the laws in any way by the government led by Christianity that many are afraid to profess keeping them in America today. Right? We see all this persecution against the house of Yahweh. Oh, no, he's a false prophet. Those things he prophesied didn't come true and this and that. Because you think that way because you haven't been taught any better. Okay? That is a fact. Okay? Believe whatever you want, people. But if you do not know how these things work, okay. All right. Notice from the complete works of Josephus, page 589, Caesar gave orders that they should now demolish the whole city and temple except the 3 towers. Okay, we already read this. But the house of Yahweh has been persecuted left and right, that they're a doomsday cult and this and that, but because they're not part of your mainstream religions. Okay, I see this persecution here at home. Like I was telling about my dad, you shouldn't put religion in front of you. But this is exactly prophecy fulfilled when the Messiah said, I will bring a sword to cause divisions. Not true peace between all Christians. They act all nice and lovely. And no, that's not how it works. In our studies, we found the prince spoken of by Daniel and Daniel 9:26 to be a religious leader who heads the worldly, beastly governmental system. Daniel shows us in the following scriptures 4 world ruling kingdoms, which he describes as beasts. Notice in Daniel 7:3, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the others. Daniel 7:17, these great beasts, which are 4 kings which will arise out of the earth. Daniel also, in great detail, describes these four world ruling kingdoms in Daniel 7, 4 through 7. The first kingdom was Babylon, the second, Medo Persia, the third was Greece, and the fourth is Rome. Prophecy shows that this fourth beast would still be in power when Yeshua Messiah returns. It's not per se a world power right now, but its influences are worldwide. As I've shown you about the police badges being small mini Roman shields, we have the Roman authority in America's law books. And like it says here, there is so much persecution against those who keep the laws in any way, shape, or form. And even Isaiah stated something like, he who keeps the law is ridiculed and the prophet persecuted, something like that. Okay. Or he's accounted as mad, per se. Okay. It's kind of cool how this stuff works. It really is. The world we live in today is a continuation of the Roman Empire. The United States government, which is in control at this time, is formed after the Roman system. The laws, the standards, ethics, traditions, and customs and practices are practiced today originated in pagan Rome. Also, like its ancient ancestor, this fourth kingdom, Rome, in which we now live, is governed by the same religious power, or horn, spoken of by Daniel in Daniel 7, 7 through 8. Okay, and remember in Daniel 7:23 how it would devour the whole world. It has devoured the whole world, and it has put out its own laws, traditions, customs, practices. And Revelation 13:3 says that the whole world followed after the beast. Okay, so again, because you think you are in the right Christian religion, organization, does not mean you are a part of the true, per se, belief or faith. Okay, this is not a religion, people, but we use the word religion to describe what you may believe in. Okay, it is just the righteous way of life. Okay, all right. By letting Scripture interpret Scripture, we can understand that these horns are religious powers, because this last horn is directly responsible for changing Yahweh's feast days and laws. It is certainly obvious that only a religious power would engage in changing religious days and laws such as these. Daniel clearly states this in Daniel 7:25. He would speak great words against Yahweh and think to change times and laws, feast days. From The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, 1959, page 255, we find, I guess that was the first printing, huh? Thus, in every respect, when the Pope was invested with the pagan title of Pontifex, and set himself to make that title a reality, he exactly fulfilled the prediction of Daniel, recorded more than 900 years before. It's crazy, huh? There's already enough people out there showing you these things. Like even Mr. Hawkins says, there's other people writing about this. Okay, he has used many an article from the Trumpet and other people as well, but people just don't want to believe in those things. Like I stated, they'll start believing when the poop hits the fan, per se. This same prince, though not the same man, but the religious leader who guides the politicians, who leads the beastly system, will confirm a last days covenant with many for 7 years. Yahweh inspired Daniel to foretell that this last religious governmental power, or beast, or beastly system, located in Rome, will think to change Yahweh's laws and ordain feast days, including the seventh-day Sabbath. I even made a comment a few videos back that when you start telling people about these laws, they say, well, I thought the laws were done away with, which is why the Messiah said in Matthew 5:17, do not even think I had come to destroy the laws of the prophets. See, it fits hand in glove. It fits hand in glove. This last religious power has proven to be the Roman Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, led by the Pope, who is ultimately led by Satan, who is the Queen of Heaven, guiding this beast to war against Yahweh and his last remnant of saints, the house of Yahweh, and anybody else who is against their policies and everything else. Those who keep and uphold the 613 laws of Yahweh. Notice in Daniel 7:21 and 22, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of Yahweh, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdoms. In Daniel 7:25, and he will speak great words against Yahweh. Pretty cool stuff, huh? The prince or religious leader spoken of in Daniel 9:26 will speak great words against Yahweh. We find written in the side notes of the 1560 Geneva Bible, for Daniel 7:25, that he will pass wicked laws and proclamations against Yahweh's law and destroy all throughout their kingdoms that proclaim Yahweh's laws. These man-made laws that are passed by the beastly governmental system headed by the Pope are passed for the purpose of destroying the work of Yahweh and all who will dare oppose this beastly system and its geopolitical religious leader. Read Revelation 13:15. And he had power to give life to the likeness of the beast, that the likeness of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. There you go, see? Revelation 13:15. Satan has influenced mankind with this hatred for Yahweh's laws, his people, and his way of life since man's creation, knowing that man's eternal death would result. As stated earlier, this hatred for Yahweh and his laws has brought persecution and suffering upon every era of Yahweh's house. I saw that book the other day. I have it here in my possession, and I don't think it's complete. I'll have to look through it again. It talks about every era, the 7 houses, not the 7 churches. Time after time, Satan has raised up enemies of Yahweh, including them to destroy Yahweh's holy people. Okay. Got a few minutes left. It is an admitted fact today that the armies of some 10 nations are used to bring about the will of the Pope and the Catholic Church. There are also many Catholics and Protestants, or daughters of the Catholic Church, who are holding persuasive offices in America and other leading nations. Isn't that crazy? They're using their religion to bring forth their plans and policies to the world. Like I said, I mean, not that I said, but like I've been saying about the National Sunday Law, eventually that will come to a church near you, per se. In most churches, anyways. It is also a fact that the laws passed by this beastly system are not the laws of Yahweh. Neither does the Catholic Church teach, keep, or uphold Yahweh's laws. None of them. They tell you through their church daughters or daughter churches that you can eat pork and any other defiled meats like crab, lobster, and clams, oysters, octopus, all that stuff. The laws of Yahweh have been fought against by today's religious and political world. In fact, persecution is waged against anyone who would dare practice keeping the weekly 7-day Sabbath law or the ordained feast days openly, or simply use openly the name of the Creator Yahweh. We saw this in the book of Acts, right? I told you about this, and even Jeremiah, who the haters told, hey, we don't want you here teaching in that name. We don't want you here using that name. We're not here to keep his laws. We're here to worship the Queen of Heaven and have, abundance for everything that we have. This beastly system is made up of a religious organization, a spiritual leader, political leaders who are loyal in order to get votes, and almost the whole world as deceived followers, and these make war or bring persecution against those who would dare do the will of Yahweh in the last days. So in these prophecies, we see a very strong religious system backed by politicians, law enforcement, armies, national guards, and news media using lying propaganda and deceptive scheming to try to destroy Yahweh's followers in these last days. It's crazy. This war against the saints will be continuous persecution during the last 7 years. The persecution, along with wars among the nations, will increase to the point of desolations, which is a determining factor. Notice again in Daniel 9:26, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. The end spoken of here is the end of man's governments of the people and by the people and for the people, based purely on selfishness and greed, which brings destruction. Although the Vatican, the Pope's headquarters in Rome, has no armies to speak of, Scripture shows us that the governments of this world would lend their strength to this religious leader. This religious leader, proven early to be the Pope, not necessarily the one we might have now, but eventually, if there comes another one. This world's governmental and political leaders fully realize that the Pope is a world geopolitical leader. This religious leader, proven earlier to be the Pope, has diplomatic representatives in virtually every nation. Talking about kissing his ass, huh? This geopolitical religious business system will continue to wage war, assisting nations who will cooperate and bringing down nations who will not. They will also continue to persecute the saints of Yahweh or any religion who will disagree and refuse to accept their mark. Revelation 13:15, right? Who will not worship their image. Through means of persecution against the saints of Yahweh, those who fulfill the whole law of Yahweh unto the governments of the people and by the people, by bringing destruction upon themselves. Okay. We see these prophecies that the last 7 years will end with utter destruction. Cool. Love this stuff. Very, very cool. Okay, people. That's the end of this video. Got a few minutes. Okay. So we're starting to see a bit more details, a bit more on how this 7-year covenant is supposed to work to bring forth a one world religion through geopolitical means, through propaganda, through lying. They know how to do all this twisting and turning of their policies and how to bring about the Pope's will to cause people to forget we're in a modern day America. We don't do those things anymore. Those things are only for the Jews and blah, blah, blah. But while saying these things, they themselves may or may not know that they're actually fulfilling these prophecies in the book of Daniel. Okay. But all this destruction, all this hatred is being brought forth by us ourselves because we have broken the everlasting covenant and have willfully, directly, or ignorantly brought forth this destruction to Yahweh's people because people hate Yahweh's name. They don't want to keep his laws. They want to keep doing what they want, eating pork and other defiled meats and so on and so on and so on, wearing the crucifixes and stuff like that. There's even a prophecy in Isaiah, I think, how it talks about how people who have those things are going to pray to their statues and their idols and all that kind of stuff, and it's not going to bring them anything, okay? Because they have not been taught through the word that Yahweh prohibits worship of images, okay? So this is the end of this video, and I'm going to try and cover, I don't know how much exact room I have on these phones, but I may not put it through the Power Director app. I may just upload them as I record them. So hopefully I'm speaking clear enough where y'all can understand the scriptures that I'm giving you guys and gals. Okay. But yeah, this is the second, I think this is the second one, right? For the installment of Daniel's prophecies. Let me see here. We got 2 minutes. Let's see. Back to another installment here. Yeah, okay. Videos. Okay, so this is the second installment of the 70 weeks in the book of Daniel. And I hope you guys are catching on, okay, and can maybe not put these things in proper order per se, okay? So like I said, I'll see what I can do if I can upload them just like that. And if not, I can put them to the Power Director and give you guys the scriptures. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see what comes to pass, okay? For now, you guys have a great day. I will see you guys in the next video. Comment section is open. Thoughts, comments, questions, whatever you want to add on there, okay? So, cheerio. Have a great day.